Hello.
Hello.
Thank you all for coming. My name is William Fitzgerald, and I'm the founder and a partner at the Worker Agency. Firstly, I'd like to appreciate the Gov Summit for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. All the stagehands, the producers, this is an incredible event. Thousands of people have been working long hours to put this together, and I think it's really incredible, so I want to give them all a hand of applause. Thank you to the producers. So I'm talking to you today, basically, and I'm talking, I think, to a lot of startups. And it's kind of counterintuitive, basically, to talk to companies about other companies. But I think it makes sense. Many of you are living in a world that's controlled by a very small number of companies. The internet economy is dominated, whether you're doing e-commerce and you're fighting against the Amazon marketplace, whether you're selling an app on the Apple App Store and you're having to pay the exorbitant fees from Apple. Because of the concentration of power, there's a real reason for startups to engage in the political process. I know many of you just want to put your head down, you want to build amazing products, you want to deliver great things for your customers, but the reality is you actually don't really have a choice in many cases. You actually are almost sometimes forced to engage in the political process, to look at some of the legislation that's coming, to look at some of the ministers that are kind of having a say over your world, and it's important to engage in that. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about is my journey and why I'm here, and also if you do decide to engage, if there is an issue that you're struggling with, how you could potentially go about that. So who am I? So my name is William Fitzgerald. I'm based in Berkeley, California. I run a firm called the Worker Agency. We do advocacy and communications, working with labor unions, working with tech accountability organizations, with antitrust experts. But I set that up 6 years ago, and before that I spent 10 years at Google, where I worked as a lobbyist for half of the time in Asia Pacific, and then I worked doing policy communications at Google for about 3 or 4 years in the US. So I helped Google. I helped them do campaigns. I helped them to make sure that regulation didn't get passed. I helped them to write legislation that got passed, that made their, what they want for the world, for that to come into reality. Helped them create research that aligned with their agenda. Helped them write op-eds. Helped them connect with heads of state, and I learned a lot. I enjoyed every minute that I was there, because I learned how large corporations manage to create the world that allows them to juice their share price and to kind of profit, insane amounts of money. But over the years, I got a little bit dissatisfied with the concentration of power, and what I saw was a lot of kind of activity with impunity. Kind of creating laws that would only suit a small number of people. So I quit in 2018, I set up this firm, and since then, as I mentioned, we've been working with smaller organizations, labor unions, non-profit organizations, even businesses, trying to basically hold them accountable, trying to make sure that if there is a law in place, that they are abiding by that law, or even if that law is in place, that law is enforced, or if we see them writing their own laws, which happens on occasion, trying to fight to make sure that those laws are not just 100% going to work out for big tech. So that's where I come from. This is who I am. So the thing I've been doing for 6 years has been basically helping organizations like yours run campaigns. And by a campaign, I mean a political campaign to try and change a law or to create a law. So if you are thinking about something like this, the first thing you need to ask yourself is what does winning look like? What is that campaign objective? And it's no different from what a business objective is. A good business objective is one that's very clear. I want to get to 25% profitability by the end of 2024. A bad business objective is something saying, I want to grow my revenue. The problem with the second one is you don't know if you've won once you've got there. Similarly with a political campaign. A bad one looks like, I want to improve my relationships with the minister. Who cares? I want to build my network with the people in big tech so I can make good arguments to them. You don't really know in those instances whether you've won or not. A better political campaign is like, I need to get a bill passed that does exactly this thing, or big tech is going to try pass that bill and I need to kill it. So that's the number one thing you should be thinking about before you embark on any, kind of within your own company, within your own world, like what is that specific objective that you want to get to, and then after that you work backwards. As you begin to work backwards, you ask yourself, what are you up against? Well, you're up against the most powerful entities in the world, number one. Not always a bad thing. that actually means you're on the right side. But you're up against organizations that have tentacles in every head of state in the world. They have ability to work with researchers. They have ability to work with a range of non-profits that will be aligned with their agenda. But what you have is you're nimble. You have other organizations and business in a similar situation. And what you want to do basically when you're in a situation like this is basically conduct a power map, right? And a power map basically looks like who is the actual decision maker that if you could convince them, you could actually figure, the problem that you're experiencing would be solved. But as you think about that, like your issue right now might be Apple is charging too much when somebody buys an app by the App Store. Like, why are they getting such a big cut? The decision maker in that is Tim Cook. Tim Cook doesn't care about you. He probably is a lovely guy, and Apple probably, profess and they make beautiful phones. I love the Apple iPhone. But putting pressure on him directly is probably going to be not the best use of your time. But perhaps looking at the lawmakers who regulate the concentration of power in business, that might be a good way to spend time. So, if you're based in Europe, you're looking at folks that work in the European Commission on antitrust. If you're looking in America, it's the FTC, and that's where your leverage is, right? You don't need to spend as much time on trying to convince Apple. They're doing that because they're making money, and that's fine. What you want to do is figure out a way that public servants and lawmakers are actually trying to create a world where all companies can succeed, and you want to basically convince that person. So that's where your leverage is like, and then when you figure out the key maker in the government, what do they care about? They need to be re-elected, right? They need to basically have a constituency. Maybe they're from a small town in a small city. But you spend a lot of time really thinking about, basically that power map, who the decision maker is, and who are the people that they care about, and who are the audiences that they're trying to please. And then after that, you can basically come up with the tactics. We'll talk about the tactics in a minute, but before I go into the tactics, what does it take to win? So there's kind of three things: persistence, having an understanding of the world we're in, and then the tactics. But persistence is probably the most important thing to keep in mind. I've often joked with my business partner that instead of calling ourselves the worker agency, we should call ourselves Persistence Communications. Because the reality is if you want to be kind of good at this stuff, you can't just get one press cycle, you can't just do one meeting with a minister, you can't just publish one report. You really got to be in it for the long haul. You got to kind of stick at it for a consistent amount of time and keep at it. The big tech or even public agencies, they don't really care about one negative news cycle. They also don't care about 10 negative news cycles. They do get a little bit annoyed though when there's 50 news cycles. And every day, the head of comms at X firm is waking up and it's another bad story and it's impacting their brand. So you really want to try and think of the long arc of your campaign and be as persistent as possible over as long a period as time. And oftentimes you can think on day one of a few different tactics, which we'll talk about, but it also requires you to be incredibly creative and nimble as you're going through things. Things like newsjacking. When you see something in the news relevant to your issue, that might be a good time to write the op-ed. That might be a good time to protest outside the corporate HQ. So persistence and creativity are a key part to it. The other part is to really make sure not to rely on the good conscience of the kind of tech overlords, basically. A lot of time gets spent, and I think it's ultimately wasted, trying to appease and make better arguments and show them the data about how this problem is bad. And my former team, there's a whole network of folks within these companies who are very good at having long conversations with you and giving you both sides and stuff. And ultimately, I feel it's not a great use of time from your perspective because they're going to work in their best interest, and that's fine, right? They're within kind of American companies. It's shareholder value, which basically means just choose the share price, and that's the world that they live in. But you don't need to kind of let them have all the power. You can kind of take that power away from them by not actually spending as much time listening to their arguments and actually building up your coalition, building up the other startups who are experiencing the same pain that you are and making that voice a bit stronger. Then the last thing then is the tactics, right? So you have your objective, you've done your power map, and the next thing then is the tactics. So the tactics can be a range of things. They can be a protest. They can be, sometimes you're experiencing something, but you don't know if it's a thing that everyone's experiencing. So maybe you need to do a survey and you need to reach out to other companies experiencing the thing. So those other companies would be considered traditional allies. The other people you could think about would be non-traditional allies. So for example, you might be a company, so you might represent the small businesses in your country, but there might also be other people, whether it's disability rights activists or kind of climate organizers who are also impacted in the same way, and you have an opportunity to build coalitions kind of across with these non-traditional allies, so that from the big tech's perspective, one day they wake up, there's a startup saying what you're doing is wrong. The next day they wake up and it's a different organization who isn't a startup. And then maybe the next day you found out that there is a policymaker, a lawmaker who actually agrees with you. So you go and you make a relationship with that lawmaker, you figure out maybe you can do a press conference together. Maybe there's an op-ed that could be written, maybe there's social media, there's a whole level of range of tactics that you can kind of map out from day one. You can also cultivate relationships with academics. If you have some funding, you can work with think tanks. Corporates are very, very good at paying lots and lots of money to people like McKinsey and BCG to write commission research that basically advances their agenda. There are also think tanks on the other side who actually want the world to be a better place and want more accountability, want kind of more level of the playing field. Maybe you basically bring together some of the startups in your world and get them to commission some research that shows what's actually happening versus what's being presented to us by a handful of corporations. I've only got 2 minutes left. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to rush through this. I tried to list some of the wins, and I ended up with a long list of 10 of them. I'll go through 3 of them. One, in California, Uber and Lyft basically didn't want to pay workers' comp from workers. They didn't want to pay when a driver got sick. They didn't want to pay. What did they do? They wrote a law. Not only did they draft the law, they spent $230 million getting it passed in California. It's called Prop 22. We lost California-wide. I worked with an organization called Gig Workers Rising. The interesting thing within that is we actually beat them in the Bay Area. If you look at the votes, we break it down, we had over 60% of people agreed with the drivers in the Bay Area, and that was because for about 2 years, we did persistent protests at Uber HQ, we worked with lawmakers, and we actually just consistently made the world realize that Uber flexibility, that talking point, was not actually flexibility. It meant that drivers were sleeping in their cars, drivers didn't have health insurance. Another really good example we just saw in the US over the last few years was the antitrust. A few very smart people got together, put some key personnel is policy, so put key personnel in place, and that led to a lot of the good stuff you're seeing in the US right now, not just in tech, but across various sectors. Another one is Meta, Facebook, OpenAI. They subcontract, mostly big companies, their business models are to subcontract work out to other countries where the labor is cheaper. That happened in Kenya. A lot of workers were fired for organizing, but you got some very brave workers in Kenya with some very smart strategic litigators, and they're holding Meta to account under Supreme Court in Kenya for violating labor law. Meta will argue for all day long that they're not under labor law in Kenya. That's bullshit. And we may see an example there where they might actually be held to account, and that doesn't matter. That's not important just for Meta in Kenya. That same legal argument can be made across the world where big tech is subcontracting work out to places like Bangladesh, Philippines. So what's next? Trump just got elected. He's going to put all his folks in power. A lot of them are very friendly to big tech. The 2 or 3 things I want to say on that is that there's an opportunity here, like you saw in 2016, a lot of the CEOs basically aligned with kind of liberals, kind of against Trump. They've got a complete 180. They want the defense contracts. They basically want to be aligned with power. There's an opportunity here for other CEOs who are not just going to look at pure profit and actually to build kind of other leadership. And so we're not just looking at the same CEOs who are completely, kind of only going to align with folks like Elon Musk. So I think it's like a clarion call to all of you to think about maybe this is an opportunity for you all to speak out when you're seeing software being used to deport millions of people and say, hey, that's not software that I'd ever leave my company do. Maybe when you see the AI being used to target drones in Palestine, that's also another opportunity where you'd say that type of defense work is not the type of defense work I want to go. Because the window is shifted, they own the means of communications, and it actually is going to take smaller businesses speaking out to actually kind of like shift it back in a way where human rights have more value than just pure profits. So on that, thank you for your time. If you want to email me, there's my email. And, thank you.